Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. In this video, we are going to discuss the quintessential cards needed to build the core of a cheat Bigguns into play commander deck with Atla Palani Nest Tender as its general. Atla Palani Nest Tender made her debut as a commander option in the Primal Genesis pre-constructed EDH deck from the Commander 2019 product. Atla is a 2/3 human shaman for 1 in Naya colors. We can pay 2, tap her, and create a 0/1 green egg creature token with Defender. Whenever an egg we control dies, we reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal a creature card. We then put that card onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of our library in a random order. Naya is home to some of the most powerful creatures in Magic, and Atla's triggered ability allows us to cheat these Bigguns into play from our library whenever one of our eggs gets scrambled. Our goal is to fill the core of this build with the most powerful Bigguns Naya has to offer, and then find ways to get them onto the battlefield from among a host of various cheat-to-play spells and abilities, highlighted, of course, by Atla's egg-triggered ability. We begin the core of this build focusing on eggs. Although Atla creates egg creature tokens, it is more preferable for our general to enter the battlefield with a clutch of eggs already at her disposal. This way, we can start making omelets as soon as she arrives. Mysterious Egg, Rock Egg, Dragon Egg, and Smoldering Egg have egg creature types and trigger Atla's ability when they die. As additional boni, upon their deaths, Rock Egg creates a 3/3 white bird creature token with flying, and Dragon Egg creates a 2/2 red dragon creature token with flying and fire breathing. Smoldering Egg has some instant and sorcery spell synergies, but these abilities may not be realized in this type of build. Its slot here is warranted due to its egg creature type, not its spell-slinging payoffs. We're not done yet. Remember, the changeling mechanic means that a creature is all creature types, and that includes egg. So Universal Automaton, Firebelly Changeling, Masked Vandal, and Imposter of the Sixth Pride all count as eggs and trigger Atla's ability when they die. Masked Vandal exiles target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls when it enters the battlefield, as long as we exile a creature card from our graveyard. We continue with our Changeling additions with Guardian Gladewalker, Avian Changeling, Taurian Mauler, and Bloodline Pretender. The Gladewalker puts a +1/+1 counter on target creature when it comes into play. Avian Changeling has flying. Taurian Mauler gets a +1/+1 counter whenever an opponent casts a spell, while a Bloodline Pretender can get +1/+1 counters from a chosen creature type whenever a creature of that type enters the battlefield and under our control. Oh, and yes, this is exactly 1 dozen eggs we just showcased. It may appear risky to include so many non-Bigguns that can be put onto the battlefield from our library through Atla's ability, but we've got that covered. If that happens, then we'll just sacrifice them and keep digging through our library until we get a creature that will rock the world of our opponents and their life totals. We can tap High Market to sacrifice a creature and gain 1 life. Goblin Bombardment lets us sacrifice a creature and it deals 1 damage to any target. We put charge counters onto Spawning Pit, which can be used to create 2/2 colorless spawn artifact creature tokens by paying 1 and removing 2 of these charge counters. Altar of Dementia has target player mill cards from the top of their library equal to the sacrificed creature's power. Sacrifice outlets are important for the purposes of triggering Atla's ability whenever we want, even during our opponent's turns. We're not done sacrificing our eggs yet. If we sacrifice a creature to it, then the next time a source of our choice deals damage to any target this turn, Martyr's Cause prevents it. Fanatical Devotion allows us to regenerate target creature. We add 1 mana of any color with Phyrexian Altar, and 2 colorless mana with Ashnod's Altar. With these cards, we are prepared to trigger Atla's ability over and over and over again. Why cheat just one Biggin into play at a time with Atla? Let's maximize her ability by including a copy of Strionic Resonator. If we pay 2 and tap it, then we can copy target triggered ability. In this scenario, if an egg dies with Atla on our side of the battlefield, we activate the Strionic Resonator, copying her triggered ability, and put 2 creatures into play from our library for the cost of just 1 egg. Lithoform Engine can do the same, but also can copy activated abilities, instant, sorcery, and permanent spells we control. These copying abilities are very relevant to this build. We have our eggs, we have numerous ways to crack them and get them into the graveyard. Now it's time to talk about some Bigguns. Let's start things off with a little opponent interaction. Apex Altasaur fights up to 1 target creature we don't control when it comes into play, and through its Enrage mechanic, it can fight up to 1 target creature we don't control whenever it is dealt damage, a process that can be repeated multiple times. As a beefy 10/10, this dinosaur can rid the battlefield of numerous creatures and also survive. Terastodon destroys up to 3 target non-creature permanents when it comes into play. For each permanent put into a graveyard this way, its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. It's also a 9/9. In this build, Terror of the Peaks can sling heaping amounts of direct damage, as whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. An early turn Terror of the Peaks can lead to a very quick game. Zakama Primal Calamity has 3 different activated abilities that either deal 3 damage to target creature, destroys target artifact or enchantment, or gains us 3 life. Although we may not reap the benefits of casting this Elder Dinosaur and untapping all lands we control, we will enjoy sending its 9/9 Vigilant and Trampling body into combat. If our suite of Bigguns is not imposing enough, then let's find some ways to create additional creatures from which our opponents can whisper awe or shout obscenities. Giant Edifage creates a token that's a copy of itself whenever it deals combat damage to a player. Getting this insect onto the battlefield early in the game could get out of hand very quickly, particularly due to its 7/7 trampling body. Godsire can tap to create an 8/8 red, green, and white beast creature token. Godsire is an 8/8 with vigilance, so it can attack and create a creature token in the same turn. Old One-Eye is a 6/6 with trample, gives other creatures we control trample, and when it comes into play, we create a 5/5 green Tyrannid creature token. It also has a built-in recursive ability that we can activate at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase. When Ancient Gold Dragon deals combat damage to a player, we roll our lucky D20. We create a number of 1/1 blue fairy dragon creature tokens with flying equal to the result. They're not big, but boy can they be plentiful. Speaking of big, some of the Bigguns selected for the core of this build were chosen simply because of what they can do in combat. Worldspine Worm is a 15/15 trampler that creates 3 5/5 green worm creature tokens when it dies, and when it's put into the graveyard from anywhere, we shuffle it into our library. Gulta Primal Hunger is a 12/12 trampler with the potential to cast it much cheaper than its mana value of 10 and 2 green mana. It makes no difference to us. Atla will get it into play at the cost of an egg. Titanith Rex is an 11/11 with trample, so is Blightsteel Colossus, but it also has Infect and Indestructible, with a similar auto-shuffle effect just like Worldspine Worm. A player loses the game if they have 10 poison counters, and the Blightsteel Colossus can give an opponent 11 of them at a time. Gishath, Sun's Avatar, is a 7/6 with Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we reveal that many cards from the top of our library. We may put any number of dinosaur creature cards from among them onto the battlefield and the rest on the bottom of our library in a random order. Although there are some dinosaur creature cards and creature cards with changeling in the core of this build, relying on Jashath's combat damage trigger to put them onto the battlefield may lead to disappointment. Instead, we appraise the value of a 7/6 with Vigilance, Trample, and Haste, and how quickly it can lessen our opponent's life totals. Speaking of Trample and Haste, Thrasta Tempest's Roar has both of these abilities in addition to trampling over Planeswalkers, which means it can deal excess combat damage to the controller of the Planeswalker it's attacking. As if the Trample and Haste weren't enough, Thrasta has hexproof as long as it entered the battlefield this turn. Zetalpa Primal Dawn is a 4/8 with Flying, Double Strike, Vigilance, Trample, and Indestructible. In a vacuum, it's one of the most powerful and hard to deal with creatures in Magic. Imagine putting Zetalpa onto the battlefield on turn 3. Megalanoth is a 6/6 with Vigilance and Trample, and has an ability that may make opponents think twice about attacking us. Whenever Megalanoth blocks a creature, Megalanoth deals damage to that creature's controller equal to Megalanoth's power. 6 points of direct damage can be very impactful. With such a high presence of Trample secondary to our chosen Bigguns, it makes sense to include a copy of Quartzwood Crasher. It's a 6/6 with Trample, and whenever one or more creatures we control with Trample deal combat damage to a player, we create an XX green Dinosaur Beast creature token with Trample, where X is the amount of damage those creatures dealt to that player. This can get out of hand very, very quickly. We do have some Bigguns that provide utility resources as well. When Ancient Copper Dragon deals combat damage to a player, we roll our lucky d20 and then create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. With Old Gnawbone, whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to an opponent, we create that many treasure tokens. With such a trove of treasure tokens, we can cast our Bigguns basically for free. Speaking of casting spells for free, Atla Primal Storm could net us a considerable number of free spells. Whenever it attacks, each player exiles the top card of their library. Then we may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana costs. Although Atla does not have evasion, its exile ability more than makes up for it. Getting any of these creatures onto the battlefield in the early game should lead to a round of good games soon after. We can tilt the battlefield into our favor even more with Avacyn, Angel of Hope, and Void Winnower. Avacyn gives permanents we control indestructible, while Void Winnower prevents our opponents from casting spells with even mana values, and it prevents our opponents from blocking with creatures that have even mana values as well. With 8/8 and 11/9 bodies respectively, each creature can hold their own in combat. Speaking of combat, for a theme that is teeming with Bigguns that are primed for combat, there are a few combat-specific creatures that should end the game quickly upon their entry onto the battlefield. Blast Furnace Hellkite is a 5/5 flyer with double strike that gives creatures attacking our opponents double strike as well. Notice the text here. This dragon doesn't give just our attacking creatures double strike, it gives any creatures attacking our opponents double strike. So our opponents can attack each other with their own double-striking creatures, all thanks to Blast Furnace Hellkite. This damage-dealing dynamic ticks up several notches in the presence of Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight. She is a 5/5 flyer with first strike, and she doubles the damage dealt to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls by any source, which means that attacking creatures with double strike would deal double strike damage. As a bonus, this Avacyn Stored Original allows us to prevent half the amount of damage dealt to us or permanents we control rounded up. If these two combat stalwarts aren't enough to finish the game, then Aurelia the War Leader will be. Her power and toughness stats do not qualify her as a Biggun, but what she does on the battlefield certainly makes up for it. Whenever Aurelia attacks for the first time each turn, we untap all creatures we control. After this phase, there is an additional combat phase. Since she has haste, Aurelia can come down and attack on the same turn, leading to explosive turn after explosive turn until she is either dealt with or we win the game. We have our eggs, we have our Bigguns, but what happens if we don't have our general? If Atla is languishing in the command zone due to the malice in our opponent's hearts, then we can use some other cheating Bigguns into play spells and abilities. Selvalis Stampede provides players with a choice. We reveal cards from the top of our library until we reveal a creature card for each wild vote, and then put those creatures onto the battlefield. We may put a permanent card from our hand onto the battlefield for each free vote. Our opponents have no voting privileges when it comes to casting Tooth and Nail, although they probably wish they did. Either we search our library for 2 creature cards and reveal them and put them into our hand, or we put up to 2 creature cards from our hand onto the battlefield. Each of these options are powerful, so let's do both by paying an additional 2 mana and entwine this sorcery. For repeatable sources of cheating our Bigguns into play, we can pay 1 and a green mana and tap Monster Manual to put a creature card from our hand onto the battlefield. The sorcery portion of this card, Zoological Study, mills the top 5 cards of our library, and then we return a creature card milled this way to our hand. Quicksilver Amulet mimics Monster Manual's instant speed cheat into play ability, but it costs 4 to activate instead of 1 and 1 green mana. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, Lurking Predators allows us to reveal the top card of our library. If it's a creature card, then we put it onto the battlefield. If it isn't, then we may choose to put the card on the bottom of our library instead. This enchantment may make our opponents think twice about casting too many spells. Kodama of the East Tree is a sneaky good inclusion for this type of build. Whenever another permanent enters the battlefield under our control, if it wasn't put onto the battlefield with Kodama's ability, then we may put a permanent card with equal or lesser mana value from our hand onto the battlefield. The aforementioned cheating Bigguns into play spells and abilities trigger Kodama as long as the mana value requirement is met. This means that we put a second creature into play. With Kodama, imagine putting 2 creatures into play instead of 1 with Sneak Attack. We pay a red mana to activate it and put a creature card from our hand onto the battlefield. It gains haste and is sacrificed at the beginning of the end step, but the second creature put into play by Kodama remains. Our opponent's beliefs in winning may not. It's time to close out this video by adding some cards that synergize with and enhance our cheating Bigguns into play theme. Let's make sure our creatures can attack as soon as possible by including a copy of Rhythm of the Wild. Our non-token creatures have Riot, which means when they enter the battlefield, they do so with either a +1/+1 counter or with haste. Since putting a +1/+1 counter on any of our creatures is like adding a drop of water to an ocean, we'll choose haste. Let's take advantage of our creature's robust powers by including Elemental Bond and Garruk's Uprising. Each card is an enchantment with a mana value of 2 and 1 green mana. Elemental Bond draws us a card whenever a creature with power 3 or more enters the battlefield under our control, while Garruk's Uprising puts a card into our hand whenever a creature with power 4 or more comes into play on our side of the battlefield. It also draws us a card when it enters play if we control a creature with power 4 or greater. As if our Bigguns needed any more enhancements, Garruk's Uprising also gives them all trample. Speaking of unneeded enhancement, Unnatural Growth fits that description secondary to its inclusion here. At the beginning of each combat, we double the power and toughness of creatures we control until end of turn. This is almost unfair. Continuing our unfair trend, what if we included a copy of Maskwood Nexus? It has an ability that can create a 2/2 blue shapeshifter creature token with Changeling when we pay 3 mana and tap it. Of course, since the shapeshifters have Changeling, they're also eggs and trigger Atla upon their deaths. They're also dinosaurs and can be put onto the battlefield with Jashath's combat damage trigger. More potent to the core of this build is that Maskwood Nexus makes creatures we control every creature type. The same is true for creature spells we control and creature cards we own that aren't on the battlefield. With Maskwood Nexus alongside our general, whenever a creature we control dies, Atla's ability triggers and we effectively replace that creature with another. In essence, this dynamic forces our opponents to think twice about destroying our creatures for fear of what might replace them. Hopefully, our playgroup won't replace us as a result. This video provided a blueprint for building the core of a cheat Bigguns into play commander deck around Atla Palani Nest Tender as its general. Removal spells, disruption, ramp, and the land base can vary from build to build, and also are dependent on metagame preferences and availability. The cards discussed during this video are suggested options for crafting the core of a cheap Bigguns into play EDH deck, in addition to providing ways to optimize this theme. Let me know your thoughts about these recommendations in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.